Hello, cooking enthusiasts. This week's video is sort of a long time coming. A little over 3 years ago, I made a video for a Cacio e Pepe cheese slice, which also served as this sort of instant stabilized Cacio e Pepe sauce. Now, actually, around 8 months ago, sort of in collaboration with Binging with Babish, the Italian YouTube channel Italia Squisita made a video covering their version of a stabilized cacio e pepe, which was done by the Roman chef Luciano Monasilio. And that technique was also pretty recently covered and slightly adapted by another pretty big YouTuber, Ethan Chlebowski. And the crux of the Luciano technique, which are being further adapted, is a hydrated starch paste. I believe he originally calls for cornstarch or corn or potato, and Ethan uses potato starch. Now, again, this is originally developed by a Michelin starred Italian chef famous for his pasta dishes. So, I don't want to say I've developed a better technique for foolproof cacio e pepe, but I think I have created a version that is as stable or more stable than his technique while being closer in flavor and texture to a truly old school classic. So I'm starting by taking inspiration from my cacio e pepe cheese slice from 3 years ago, as well as my recent Alfredo paste. Everything is based on ratios, and we have a measured total for this batch, and we start by adding half of it to the food processor. So unlike my cheese slice from 3 years ago, nothing is going to be heated up. It's just going to be blended and kept cold. And then the pasta dish itself is sort of what activates everything. The next step is adding some butter and a little bit of a harder cheese, which in this case is Parmigiano, but could also be Grana Padano. Obviously, the most traditional version of this dish uses only Pecorino Romano, although even many Italian chefs do add a little bit of another cheese, and Luciano actually uses a majority of Grana Padano with some Pecorino. And if I forgot to mention at the beginning, the start was water and ice going in, which is going to keep all of the butter fat solid as we are building this emulsion. Finally, we add the last of the pecorino and the sodium citrate, which is the star stabilizer of this preparation. And I really like it because it's very useful in even small quantities. Then we are just continuing to process and scrape everything down to make sure it all ends up fairly smooth. Not totally. It will look basically like a whipped ricotta kind of texture. At this stage, if you wanted it to be 100% convenient, you would be toasting off a specific amount of black pepper, grinding it a little, and then incorporating that directly into this cheese paste. I am choosing not to because I want to experiment with different peppercorns for each version of the dish. And I think using the citrate versus a hydrated starch has a lot of advantages. And again, this paste can be refrigerated for several days or frozen for several weeks. I want to make really my final sales pitch. And again, I really don't want to sound arrogant in the face of such great chefs who have made a really good recipe. My ultimate issue is that a cornstarch or a potato starch is ultimately a very large molecule, and that necessitates that it dulls the flavor somewhat. Obviously, not completely, which is why we do use them. Hydrated gels of starch, especially cornstarch, are also not necessarily stable in the fridge for several days. They tend to weep moisture, which could cause issues. The sort of final crux is that using starch seems redundant. There is a little bit of starch in pasta water, obviously, but the main issue is that starch is primarily a thickener, and obviously a thicker liquid does help stabilize the emulsion, but the starch itself is not an emulsifier. Whereas with something like sodium citrate, it is only an emulsifier that helps sort of break down dairy-based proteins. It's activated by the temperatures of cooking, but then the sauce it creates is stable whether it's cold or hot or reheated. And the usage is so minuscule that it really does not affect the flavor of something like cacio e pepe at all. What's been on screen is just a sort of casual cacio e pepe using the paste from Frozen and using shells. Depending on the portions and the exact pasta shape, you might be able to get away with using just the residual heat of the hot pasta, or you might be able to briefly bring it up on a low temperature just to bring everything together. Always use pasta water when necessary, but be a little conservative with it because there is a decent amount of just water in the cacio e pepe paste. But I hope you enjoyed this video and give making this cacio e pepe paste a try. Next week's video is going to be a little bit of a paradox. It's sort of my optimized workflow for a slightly more refined cacio e pepe, while at the same time we did actually make some mistakes. but were able to power through and demonstrate how stable this cheese paste actually was. So I also hope you will find that interesting. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and please feel free to share this video if you enjoyed it. Otherwise, thank you for watching.